Good evening and welcome to Dominican University of California. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. My name is Denise Lucy. I'm a professor of business and organizational studies and the director of our Leadership Institute in the Borowski School of Business. We are partnering with Dominican's Department of Natural Sciences to support this remarkable program that we're about to experience here in the hall. Thank you so very, very much for joining us. Isn't this a remarkable night? We have the experts in the Northern Hemisphere in this room. And aren't we fortunate to Bonnie Morse and Bonnie Bee and Company for pulling this off. Thank you, Bonnie. And as a bee hobbyist myself, I want to thank all my mentors who are in the audience, you know who you are, and to Jim Cunningham, my buddy and partner in the Department of Natural Sciences that helped make this happen tonight. Thank you so very much. So let's talk about Bonnie Morse for just a moment because she's going to open the evening and we have much to learn. Bonnie Morse is the founding director of Be Audacious and the CEO of Bonnie Bee and Company. She's also one of my mentors, as is her husband, Gary Morse. Bonnie has had a long and winding path to her current work with honeybees. While studying international relations at Johns Hopkins University, she worked as a zookeeper at the Baltimore Zoo and spent time studying wildlife in Kenya and Tanzania. After college, she traveled the world for a cultural exchange program which placed students at summer camps and work opportunities in the United States. But then she returned to school and she studied horticulture and ultimately became an International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist. She's also combined her skills and has been involved with gorilla carekeeping of Kayoko at the Gorilla Foundation. And after meeting her husband, Gary, they decided to turn their obsession of beekeeping into a career. They now own Bonnie Bee and Company, providing bee classes and consultations, and is a local source of bees and honey for Marin County. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Bonnie Morse.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you so much, Dominican University, for making this beautiful space available for this event to happen tonight. This gathering is the result of the efforts of so many people who just heard of the idea and said, I want to help make this happen. And Denise was one of those early supporters of this program. So were so many of the beekeepers that were here who helped with the fundraising, and in the last week, we're picking people up from the airport, we're doing homestays, not just for the participants who are coming from afar, but even for some of their pets. And also thank you to all the ushers and volunteers who came here tonight who are working alongside the Dominican students. We really appreciate it. Of course, this wouldn't have happened without our sponsors. Thank you to all of our sponsors, and especially a special shout out to Lush Cosmetics, who came on really early and were one of our first major sponsors. So thank you to them for seeing what the benefit of this could be. And definitely want to thank the organizing committee who committed not only a lot of time in the last year and a half, but also a lot of their own funds, including Richard and Karen Hyde, David Peterson, and Skip and Ellie Smith, as well as Linda Albion. Thank you very much for that. And probably the most, no, not probably, the most important sponsor to mention is my husband, Gary, who supported me in spending all of my spare time and some of my not so spare time in working on this conference at the expense of spending time together and also doing my fair share of work around the house and in our business, frankly. Also want to thank Larry Brilliant for taking the time to come out and delivering the keynote at the start of the conference. His message of hope and optimism and inspiring possibilities that open up through individual and collective acts of audacity really set quite a tone for the gathering. So Larry couldn't be here tonight, but we really thank him for that. This conference has really been a testimony to the fact that you can never really tell what's going to inspire an idea, much less where that inspiration is going to lead. This all was an idea born out of an editorial that Mark Winston had in Bee Culture magazine in the spring of 2015. And here, 18 short months later, here we are, 6 countries and 24 states who just spent 2 days in amazing dialogue. So the diversity of the people who gathered in Marshall really speak to the impact bees have on society. It also speaks to the potential opportunity presented through them to create meaningful change at this critical time in history. As the activities of an expanding population increasingly impact the environment of the planet which supports us. These challenges are not going to be solved in the isolation of the world of academia or alone in the farming communities or through government regulation. They're problems that need to be addressed by anyone consuming our planetary resources, which basically means by everyone. And while it's easy to remain comfortably within the confines of our work and social groups, the problems that are confronting us now will not be solved by individuals or individual groups, but will require the cooperation of as many engaged parties as possible. That's what the last few days have been all about. Diverse people collaborating to respectfully share ideas about issues in which we all have a shared and mutual interest. This evening, Doug McConnell is going to be guiding us through the presentations of just some of the ideas generated by Be Audacious. Doug's an icon in the Bay Area environmental TV journalism. The Bay Area Backroads program aired for 24 years, the longest running regional show in broadcast history. That's pretty impressive. Rather audacious, wouldn't you say? That's been followed by Open Road with Doug McConnell exploring the West. And in January, the 3rd season will begin on NBC here locally, so you can look out for that. His broadcast awards include multiple Emmys, an Iris, and a Gabriel. Please join me in welcoming Doug McConnell.
Bonnie, thank you, and congratulations, really. What a great achievement these last couple of days have been. So it's just wonderful to see you all here tonight on this rainy night. Thank you for coming. I'm hugely honored when Bonnie asked if I would just play this small role tonight and trying to, guide through. We just got a lot of ground to cover in a couple of hours, so I'm only going to say a couple of words, get out of the way, and we've got a great evening ahead of us. And we're going to hear some big, audacious ideas that can make a huge difference in terms of caring for the health of bees, caring for the health of our environment, our food supply, and all of us. So those are topics near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure they are for all of you. So we've got some really exciting stuff, inspiring stuff to hear tonight. And just out of curiosity, we've got we have bee enthusiasts out here, beekeepers, big. And are some of the conference attendees who were out at the conference out of Marconi Center, are they around tonight? Yay, hands are going up. And then you have others like me who just like to find stuff out and like to support good things. Hopefully, you're here? Yes, yay! And here to learn on top of everything else. Well, let's see, we've got, basically our thing tonight is going to have 9 thought leaders. 9 people who are coming here to try to condense 2 days of incredible thought and work. And to present us some of the principal ideas that emerged from the conference. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm going to introduce them one by one. They're going to come up one by one and make a short presentation. And then hopefully there's going to be time for a little Q&A after each one, and then we'll go on to the next and so forth, and then have some cool things at the very end to kind of wrap it up. So each segment has about 10 minutes. So we got to keep ourselves on time here tonight so we get out sometime before 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. But we are going to do it at about 9 o'clock, and then we're going to have some book signings. So we've got a great night ahead of us here. So with that, are you guys ready? All right. All right, it is a huge pleasure. I had a chance to get out to Marconi today and meet all of these people, and they are just incredible. And our first thought leader is Mark Winston, Professor and Senior Fellow at the Center of Dialogue at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and author of Bee Time, Lessons from the Hive. And Mark, you're going to be talking about why this gathering and why this dialogue is important, I think.
Thank you, Doug. I cannot even begin to tell you what a great pleasure it is to be here. We had this, Bonnie and I had a meeting in a parking lot about 8 months ago when she said she was going to do this. And I just sort of nodded my head and said, yeah, well, she did it. And we just had a great time. This meeting was really unusual. It used dialogue to envision bold, evidence-based ideas through which honeybees, wild bees, and pollination may thrive in the future. The people who were there in their diversity were unusual and actually stunning in that we had such a wide range of people in the same room. This does not happen often enough in our society. We're usually talking to people like ourselves. But we had hobby beekeepers talking to commercial beekeepers with widely divergent ways of keeping bees. We had people interested in honeybees talking to people interested in wild bees. We had university researchers and people from nonprofits and commercial beekeepers all mixed up together. It was based on a manifesto that I wrote a couple of years ago. Basically said 4 simple things: that beekeepers and wild bee enthusiasts need to really be stewards of their bees. Beekeepers, wild bee enthusiasts, we need to be promoters of healthy environments. Beekeeping itself needs to be economically viable, and its organizations need to be inclusive, collaborative, and cooperative. Simple ideas, and that was the basis of what we talked about for the last 2 days. The format was no lectures. It was all discussion. We worked on breakout groups. Groups would go off for an hour, randomly mixed up, so people were mixed up with different people every time, and talk for an hour or so about one of a number of different issues. We began by talking about values, reminding us of the bottom line things that are important to all of us. Then we had sessions on managing honeybees. Then we had sessions on pollination. Then we asked a number of fairly specific questions and had people break out into the groups they were most interested in. And the following morning, we had the whole conference propose, what do you want to talk about? And they proposed ideas, and we set up breakout sessions for those. And then, from the content that we had generated, we began moving into action. And we had a last breakout section about organizations moving forward, commitments to take the ideas that we had and really make them happen. Tonight, you will hear only a bit of the incredibly rich discussions that we had. I've been to hundreds of beekeeping meetings in my life, and I am not exaggerating. There's probably many hundreds. I cannot say I have ever been to a better or more stimulating meeting. We're going to touch on a little of it tonight, but in March or so, there will be a full report, totally comprehensive, up on the Audacious website that talks about everything. The breakout groups each had note takers, so everything was captured, and our 10 thought leaders facilitated. They, although the facilitation is not the skill, they all dove in and helped to organize and lead the discussions. We were under Chatham House rule. Chatham House rule says you can report on anything that's discussed, but not on who said it. Very important in this kind of meeting because people feel safer about opening up with what they really think. So you will hear no names tonight. You'll hear, we did this, a group of us did that, but you will not be hearing the names of who said what. The tone, audacious. The ideas we came up with were bold, mostly actionable, mostly doable, but this was not business as usual. This was being bold. And they were dialogic. They were civil, they were inclusive, they were participatory. We became the community we envisioned. We imagined a future for beekeeping and pollination in which everyone with interests is working together. And you hear about some of that tonight. But in the space of 2 days, we became that community. I'm going to finish with a very short reading from Bee Time about dialogue. And then I'm actually going to ask you for a couple of minutes to dialogue among yourselves. Dialogue involves focusing full attention on what others are saying by reducing our own inner racket. But good dialogue does not come only from paying attention to others, as important as that is. Responding constructively is a prerequisite for dialogues back and forth. It's very bee-like. The multiple levels by which we engage through dialogue are suggestive of the bee's chemical and vibratory channels. Our most obvious senses are verbal and visual, and the subtleties of these communication modes are as nuanced and layered as those of the bees in their hive. Presence and participation in human dialogues are also apparent in alert body language, increased ability to build on previous comments, staying on topic. Whatever the message, listening is paramount. The connectivity provided by the bee's many communicative channels create the colony's capacity for the collegial, collaborative environment that characterizes social insect colonies. We, too, use story and listening to connect ourselves to the larger whole. In that way, we share with honeybees that miracle of merging the individual with the collective through intense communication, which is so essential to a smoothly functioning community. Thank you. Now we're going to give you a chance to have just the tiniest flavor of what we did for about 2.5 days. I'm going to ask you in a second to turn to the 2 or 3 or 4 people around you and talk amongst yourselves just for a couple of minutes about 2 things. What is it you love about bees, and why do you love it? What do you love about bees, and why is it so important to you? Turn to your neighbors, back, forth, next to you, 2 or 3 or 4 of you, 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll call you back.
Let me bring up our next thought leader. He is, oh, and by the way, this is all being videotaped, so you'll be able to see this online, as will the world, and we'll talk more about that a little later on, how you can access it. But in any case, so here we go. Number 2, Tom Seeley is the Horace White Professor in Biology at Cornell University and author of Wisdom of the Hive, Honeybee Democracy, and Following the Wild Bees. And he's going to be talking, I think, about Darwinian beekeeping.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Mark, for organizing this, and Bonnie, too, getting it all pulled together. It's, just as Mark said, the coolest meeting I've ever been to in terms of being stimulated by ideas and just leaving this place feeling like, oh, okay, I've got a lot of work to do to build on these ideas. Now, Mark, I hope I don't mess you up. I'm going to violate Chatham House rule. I'm going to mention the name of somebody, Charles Darwin, but he won't mind. Because what I'm going to share with you is an audacious idea, which it's a new idea, which I like to call Darwinian beekeeping. Some of you may have heard about Darwinian medicine. It's the same idea of the logic of applying Darwin's understanding of how evolution works, produces organisms that are well adapted to their problems, but applying it to beekeeping. Here's how. The heart of this idea is that we beekeepers allow our colonies to live as they have evolved to live in nature, rather than to manipulate them to live in ways that benefit us, work best for us. And in other words, the idea here is to let the bees live in our hives as they do in the wild. And when we do this, we do 2 things. And when I say live in the wild, I mean out in a bee tree, as we see over here on the left. When we let them live that way, first of all, we respect the natural features of their behavior and physiology. And these are traits, these are parts of their biology which they've been exquisitely shaped by natural selection to help them survive and reproduce, just as in our own bodies, of course. And secondly, and in a longer term way, by letting them live as they have evolved to live, we allow, and not interfere, we allow natural selection to continue to operate on these bees. And this is especially important with respect to maintaining their resistance to diseases. Let's see, how do I go to the next slide? Right, here are some examples of non-Darwinian beekeeping, which is what we do. It's what those of you that are beekeepers, we've been taught, and that's what makes this idea a bit audacious. These are forms of non-Darwinian beekeeping. What do? We purchase queens from a different climate region. What do we end up with? We end up often with bees that are not well adapted to the climate where we're living. Buying bees from Georgia, bringing them to New York State, for example. What else do? We crowd colonies in apiaries. What's the effect of that? Well, first of all, that's very different than how they live in the wild. They're widely spaced. Crowding them into apiaries fosters the spread of diseases, and indeed favors the evolution of virulent strains of their diseases. Third, we eliminate aggressive colonies. How many beekeepers here have requeened a really aggressive colony? Well, we're just learning that those colonies that are most aggressive are also the most vigorous. They make the most honey. They're probably better in many ways, best in many ways. We also house our colonies in large, thin-walled hives. Putting them in large hives means they don't swarm. It's a kind of birth control for the colonies. We're slowing their reproduction or stopping their reproduction. Thin-walled hives, unlike a thick-walled tree, makes it harder for the bees to keep their nests warm. And last but not least, and this isn't really last, just the last on my list, we treat them for varroa. And thus we eliminate, by protecting them, we eliminate selection for resistance of against this deadly parasite. Well, in closing, I will acknowledge that Darwinian beekeeping is not practical for everyone. It's most easily practiced by the hobby beekeeper who has just a few colonies. But because its logic applies to all beekeepers, I feel that this is an audacious idea that every beekeeper should ponder to understand fully his or her relationship with the bees. Thank you.
Any questions anybody might have?
What do you think about putting like big slabs of insulation on the outsides of our thin-walled colonies and boxes?
You're starting to think like a Darwinian beekeeper. I like it.
That was on Vancouver Island. You must treat for varroa, right? Or they die. Any other quick questions? We've got about time for one more, maybe. Yes, right here.
How does epigenetics fit into your Darwinian, because you talk about natural selection, but we're learning a lot more about epigenetics and the environmental impacts, which is not exactly fitting in, at least as I'm thinking about the frame you're putting it in.
Yeah, to explain that, epigenetics means that your genes alone don't determine the traits you have, but it's the environment that you're living in combined with your genetic endowment that determines your traits. That's true. The beekeeper, fortunately, can control the environment as well as the genetics. So as well as selecting for good genetics, we can create good environment.
Terrific. Tom, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And now, our next thought leader, Francis Redniaks, Professor of Apiculture, the University of Sussex and the UK. He's studied bees all over the world, lived here in the United States for 13 years, including right here in California, where he kept 180 hives during his time. And I think is going to be talking about the natural use of bees with resilience to disease. Oh, there you are. Gotcha.
So thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here and with such an enthusiastic audience, and indeed we have had a very stimulating time. And the audacious idea I'd like to put forward is this one: use bees with natural resistance to diseases. That is, let the bees do the hard work of controlling diseases. Now, what do we mean by that, and why is it important? All beekeepers know that honeybees have many diseases. And here you can see 4 of the diseases that they suffer from. These diseases are serious and can kill colonies in some instances. For example, lower down we have the varroa mite sitting there on a worker bee, and to the right we have bees infected with the virus, deformed wing virus, which is spread by the varroa mite. So diseases are very important. Diseases are also hard to control. Beekeepers put a lot of energy into controlling diseases, using various chemicals in some instances to control them. And in some cases, there is no control with chemicals. For example, with deformed wing virus, there is no chemical control. So wouldn't it be better if the bees controlled their own diseases? That would save a lot of time and energy and effort. And this is not a pipe dream. This is not a crazy idea. And there are two good sources of information which indicate that honeybees do have natural mechanisms for disease resistance. One of them comes from natural colonies living in woods and so on in various parts of the United States and other places, where people have found that left to their own devices, honeybee colonies can survive even in the presence of diseases. So certainly bees will survive even if they are not treated. The second source of evidence comes from bee breeding, where we've been able to breed honeybees with specific forms of resistance which control these diseases. One of these is hygienic behavior. I won't go into the details, but suffice to say, hygienic bees remove dead and diseased larvae and pupae from sealed cells. Another example is grooming behavior. So we know that breeding works. And also there's a nice sort of synergy between the two. The first one I mentioned about wild bees living in woods, that's really an example of the Darwinian approach that we've just heard about. Here, natural selection has caused the bees to increase their defense mechanisms. And where it's been looked at, amazingly enough, we find that natural selection has often caused the bees to have the same behavioral resistance mechanisms as that we can breed for using animal breeding methods. For example, hygienic behavior is quite common in various populations of bees which have been just allowed to breed their own resistance. So there you see that we have natural resistance. And there's really one more thing to add. What have the beekeepers got to lose by using natural resistance? The chemical methods are kind of no longer really working. And more importantly, the use of chemicals to control diseases prevents the natural mechanism which we've just heard about in the previous presentation from kicking in. So the audacious idea is to not rely on these chemicals. They're not going to work much longer anyway, and they're really stopping us using a natural mechanism. So that's my audacious idea. Audacious has really two meanings. One of the meanings is really bold, and I think this idea is bold. Audacious can also mean crazy, and I don't think it means crazy. So I'll let you decide for that. But what have we got to lose if we get the bees to control their own diseases?
Do we have questions? I'd like to ask Francis.
What is chalk brood and American foul brood?
What are they? They are diseases. American foul brood is a disease caused by a bacterium. Chalk brood is a disease caused by a fungus. And they both kill the young bees. We call young bees brood, and it kills them. And if it kills enough young bees, it will kill the whole colony.
Yeah, hi, let me see if I can phrase this in a comprehensive way. So you've got two mechanisms in operation here. You've got the basically selection going on the honeybees, and you've got selection going on the beekeepers that raise the honeybees and need honeybees for economic survival. And it seems to me that it's that balance, that needle, that you've got two selective factors going on. If honeybee keepers aren't allowed to keep honeybees in large numbers, they're going to not be able to survive. And likewise, the bees aren't going to be able to survive if they are in a place where they are going to be subject to disease all the time. So how do you envision balancing those two things?
Well, first of all, the natural resistance and the breeding are really breeding probably for the same thing, but just using a different process. Natural selection doesn't know what it's doing, but it does it anyway. It's a blind process that improves the survival of animals, whereas breeding is selecting animals for the characteristics we want. It might be greater milk production in cows, but with the bees, one of the clear things that we want in our bees is that they survive better. So there really isn't a tension between natural selection for disease resistance and beekeeper or scientist-assisted breeding for the same thing.
Yeah, just really quickly, so you're advocating like completely hands-off, or how much will you actually be working the hives? I can understand not doing chemical work and stuff like that, but yeah, how much are you going to help the bees?
Well, I am advocating that some beekeepers, both commercial beekeepers and smaller scale beekeepers, may be audacious and say, well, we're really not going to use any chemical treatments, or we're only going to use soft treatments like oxalic acid. And we have to remember that in the United States, typically we're losing 30–40% of our beehives every year anyway. So what have we got to lose? The only thing we've got to lose is something which isn't working very well already.
I'm wondering, even if you have livestock that has natural resistance, what about these so-called varroa bombs where you have such intensive beekeepers where they're just inundated with mites? How do you actually assess natural resistance when they're overwhelmed?
Well, I don't know if they are overwhelmed. I should just say we've been doing research on this in my lab, and drone bombs or no drone bombs, I'm not quite sure if that's something that I've faced. So these are things which may not make it any easier, but I don't think they're things that are going to make it impossible.
How do you see natural resistance with bees tied into soil?
I don't really see them as linked, actually, because the natural resistance is something going on of the bees themselves within the colony, and I don't really think the soil is really influencing that. It's mostly the bees themselves and their behavior and their physiology that gives resistance.
Francis, thank you very much. So our next thought leader is going to talk to us about beekeeping. The beekeepers and farmers need more communications. His name is Chaz Mraz. Chaz is a third-generation commercial beekeeper who runs Champlain Valley apiaries in Vermont. And Chaz is coming right up.
So, I don't have a doctorate, and I don't have the speaking experience that these others do, so bear with me. But I do know something about communication, and one thing that was very interesting about this whole process was it was really all about communication. And it fascinated me, and I think it's an incredible tool, and I think it's a very important tool now, especially, always perhaps, but now is a critical time where we need it the most. My concerns are, I see that there are forces out there that are trying to rip apart ancient alliances like those between growers and farmers and beekeepers. It's working both ways. Farmers have the impression that beekeepers want them to stop using chemicals and pesticides, and it's going to affect their ability to grow crops profitably and work, and I don't think that's at all true, but we have to talk about these things. And then there's beekeepers who want to blame farmers for using the pesticides and farming in monocultures and things, and that we're blaming them. But if beekeepers and farmers start to work, everything's going to stop working together, everything will just fall apart. I'm convinced of that. And when you come to the pesticide issue, I really think that this issue, when explained to a farmer, is as important to them as it is to us. And I think they're getting the wrong information from the wrong places. I spoke to a farmer back home in Addison County, and he basically said, well, I don't know what's on those seeds, but I know they grow like hell. Well, neonicotinoid seed coatings, there's chemicals on those, pesticides on those seeds and inoculants and other things that when they're planted, a neonicotinoid is a systemic pesticide for anybody who doesn't know. So the plant absorbs the chemical and it becomes part of the plant, and it can show up in pollen and nectar, and that's what we're finding big problems directly with the bees. Then, so these pesticides, these seed coatings, and I just want to give a little background on them so people understand what they are. So what happened is the chemical lobby basically got these seed coatings to be classified as treated articles. And by doing that, they circumvented all pesticide control in the United States, statewide and otherwise. Basically, it's not considered a pesticide application, though by leaps and bounds the greatest use of these pesticide neonicotinoid chemicals in the United States, by leaps and bounds. Huge, huge chemical application. So we can't regulate it. And then on top of that, of these chemicals that they put on these seeds, the plant absorbs somewhere around 3% of the chemical, and the rest of it goes into the soil and our water supply. And these chemicals are persistent, very persistent. For years and years they could be persistent, 10 years, 19 years, it depends on the chemical. And then these seeds are prophylactic. It's the same seed that you plant in Texas as you plant in Vermont, as you plant in Nebraska. So we don't share the same bugs, but we're sharing the same chemicals, okay, for any bug. If it's a bug, there's something there to kill it, whether it exists or not. So they're prophylactic. And then they're planted annually. They're planted annually whether they're needed or not, even though they're persistent in the soil for years. A soil scientist in Canada told a friend of mine that they could plant corn for another 10 years without using anything because there's so much chemical in the soil. So this, for me, is a huge problem. We're building up these chemicals in our soil and in our water, and we really don't know what the effect of it's going to be. So I find communication with the farmers, that comment about, I don't know what's on it. Well, I talked to him about what's on it, and he didn't know. And he left that conversation really thinking about what he was doing to his soil. Because you got to realize most of these people own their land, sometimes for generations and generations, and their plan is to pass it on to their children and grandchildren. And I think when that message gets out, because the only message they're getting are from the seed companies and these places, they're not getting the message what's really out there. Whoops, sorry, I shook the thing. So on top of this, we used to encourage things like crop rotation. Crop rotation is a great process in farming, very healthy farming. And I fear today that if a cornfield gets turned into a hayfield and my legumes start to bloom and my bees start to fly to it, they're just getting pummeled by chemicals. And I'm going to come and find, if not dead apiary, a very weak one. And that's the type of thing we're seeing. And we're losing colonies more and more during the summertime than we've ever had in the past. So this communication with people is extremely important. And if we get in an adversary, the chemical lobby would love us to get in an adversary relationship with these people. And I just want to tell people a little example of that. When Ontario this year decided they legislated to cut back seed coating back 50% in their use in Ontario, which was audacious and bold. And I support it. They want to go 80% next year. So, so when they did that, my friend who's a beekeeper up there got about 10 calls to get those damn bees off their property. There was no, off my property, they're no longer welcome here. Now, he started talking to these people, and he still had to probably move about 3 apiaries, but that was the type of reaction that was given, and that is a complete lack of communication. Now, on the other spectrum, I have 3 minutes left? Okay, I'm not going to go too much farther. Let's go to any questions. So I wanted to give you a positive aspect of that, but I'll have to do it at a different time.
Go ahead.
Well, it may take too long, but the positive thing is when, very briefly, an article was put in the local farm journal about some work I was doing with the UVM extension on clover and how to improve hayfields that would benefit both farmers and beekeepers. And that article got published, and I thought it was wonderful they did that, and I didn't think anything of it. And a couple of years before, when all this started, I was going through Addison County seeing there were no blossoms anywhere in July, and the hay had all been cut back. And I was thinking, how can we improve this forage here? There's so much land. How can you ever make an impact? And not long after the article came out, I walked into the post office. I was in the post office, and a gentleman I didn't know came up to me, and he said, "We had a meeting about you." And I said, "You did?" And he says, "Yeah, we seeded down 2,100 acres with clovers the other day." And I thought, this is amazing. Here's positive communication that can really help something. And on top of that, I kept hearing from farmers, and they kept asking me. They didn't know that we were having trouble with the bees. A lot of them had no idea that we were losing colonies at the rate we were. And now farmers come up to me and talk to me, tell me about the bees, and now the door's swung wide open. And I can talk to them about all kinds of things. Okay, are there any questions?
In 1990, I had the most wonderful opportunity to come and study with your father bee venom therapy.
My grandfather, yep.
Charles Moret?
My grandfather.
Oh, okay. My question is, have
Where
you...
are you?
Way back there.
Have you followed in his footsteps, the bee venom therapy?
Oh, yes, there he is. I think he's very happy to be here. That's great. My grandfather did a lot of wonderful work in bees. Have I followed in his footsteps in apitherapy? I do it for myself, my family, and close friends. I don't do it publicly. I have young children, and it would be very disruptive to have people come into the house. I feel a little bit bad about that. Maybe there'll be a time in my life where I can dedicate it to that. There are people who continue it and do it, a lot of it. Don Downs in Ohio is one of those people. There's some people still very dedicated to apitherapy that are out there.
Your grandfather was very, very devoted, and I also went to China with him in 1991.
Okay.
Well, I want to make two comments. One, none of you mentioned how we, as general public, can help the environment. I think that's a key issue, and I'm a Rotarian, and about 20, 30 years ago, we started something that nobody thought was possible, eradicate polio. We're about this far. And I think if the same concept with the people involved, it would help. The second comment was that we are farmers. Beekeepers are just like farmers. Yes. I love the idea. So there's no reason we shouldn't be talking to farmers. We are farmers ourselves. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, and we are all farmers, but those adversary relationships are starting to well up because of these problems, and we have to be very careful about getting the extinguisher out and making sure they don't grow. I'm going to stop there.
All right, Chaz, thank you. Next person is right here in the state of California. Actually, he's in this building right now. Neil Williams, an associate professor of ecology and chancellor's fellow at the University of California, Davis. He is a pollination biologist. He's standing right beside me here, who works on wild bees and pollination services, and I think it's about farming with bees, farming for bees.
Well, thanks for letting me be the pretender in the room. So the next Audacious essay we want to present as a group, and I think this builds on what Chas said and what the gentleman in the back said, and it again relates to agriculture and the future health of bees within agricultural lands as providers of pollination services. The idea is that we must move forward from a concept of farming just for crops to farming for bees, all bees. and crops together. We must work together to improve the farm habitat for our bees. So agriculture, as this picture shows you, not that far from where we're standing right now, occupies a vast area of the United States, some 40% of the land area of the continental United States, and the impact is profound. Intensive agriculture creates an ironic situation for pollination. These are areas that have the greatest demand for pollination, and in places like California where crops are highly dependent, that is all the more true. But at the same time, they present profound challenges for the health of pollinators that limits those pollinators' ability to provide the pollination on which the crop depends. And these challenges apply to managed honeybees and as well as to wild bees. But I think we can learn from the case of wild pollinators. Wild bees make important contributions to crop pollination from many different crops, and they're often highly effective. They also, where we've looked, they act synergistically to make honeybees better pollinators. Furthermore, we know that diverse species of pollinators make pollination more reliable over time. Wild populations of bees and the communities that they make up cannot be moved, though, like honeybees can, and they're really part of the fabric of the farm itself. Their populations must be regenerated year to year as part of the farming process, and this requires high-quality forage and nesting habitats on the farm season after season. And the same, though, I think, is very true for managed bees, and this conference made me think how well that applies and reinforced that idea. Essentially, safe, flower-rich habitat is good for all bees. So how do we achieve this? So in our idea, well, again, we need to work together as bee lover, grower, beekeeper alliances, as Chaz articulated, and I see three ways. That will require guided dialogue. We need to design and think about frameworks for those interactions between people with different objectives and goals, helping to articulate the common goals that they share and evaluate the benefits of both parties involved, and that's the people, not only the bees. We need to design action plans. We must have tools that help in the decision-making process that are based on cost, risk, benefits to the grower, the beekeeper, and to the environment. And we need to facilitate that implementation. We need tools for growers and those that take on action that are practical and relevant for how they can create farmscapes that are profitable and sustain pollinators. We can use fees and incentives that encourage the dialogue and the actions across all regions. Thank you.
This actually is sort of a question across the last three speakers, which is, if you're all talking about this synchronicity or this working together with planting, has there been any research on plants that actually boost the immunity of bees themselves to allow them to be these better defenders against diseases and so forth?
Fascinating question. Are there plants that we can select within mixes that will help bees become healthier by boosting their own immunity to diseases? What an audacious idea. In fact, there has been that sort of research. That's not research that we're doing, although my lab helps to design things that look like that for California. There are researchers in different parts of the country who are looking at what we call the secondary chemistry of plants, their own natural defensive compounds that we use in medicines ourselves that also help to defend bees from various parasites and pathogens. And what we find when we look at bees' choices of flowers, that when they're affected by disease, their preferences for different flowers can, to a certain degree, change. They appear to self-medicate. Amazing, truly amazing. And so I do believe there's a great possibility for incorporating all of these sorts of combinations of plant materials into the decisions we make. There is research out there in different parts of the country, and it's a wonderful idea to think about not incorporating only food that's sort of nutritious in terms of the amount it offers, but the quality in very unique ways. So, great idea.
Wow.
Hi, I understand that the subsidies for ethanol from corn have promoted the removal of a lot of plant species that are good for bees. I wonder what it would take to get rid of the subsidy for ethanol and allow bee habitat to return.
You guys are incredibly audacious. our next speaker will follow up on some of that. I think the statements you're making are accurate. I think financial climates change, and we have great opportunity to reverse some of that and increase the habitat. And I think some of the things we talked about in the conference also talked about more long-term solutions where the land acquisition, in perpetuity easements, et cetera, that would have that land for bees stable over a longer period of time. So there are many strategies. Great question.
Our next thought leader, Bill Klett. Bill is a beekeeper who has a family-run commercial beekeeping operation. He produces honey in North Dakota and Queens in Texas. And Bill, you're going to talk about the Congressional Farm Bill.
I am. Yep. This topic doesn't sound so audacious or so sexy from the get-go, but I think if we go at it in a very audacious way, we maybe can get better results from this than from a lot of other things. It doesn't matter how well you would take care of our bees, they got to have habitat. They've got to have a place to do what they do. And throughout all of the farmed regions of the country, I don't think there's any entity with more influence on habitat than the United States Department of Agriculture through the Farm Bill. And we're at a point right now in time when a new Farm Bill is going to be drafted. This is a long process, and we certainly need to be in on this. When a new administration comes in like this, it's anybody's guess what this new Farm Bill will look like, but those who have been involved in the past all say it's the very best time to effect some changes when the reins change from one administration to another, so we got to be there. First thing to keep in mind is that the farm bills to date already have a lot of good features in them for pollinators. And this, of course, is a vast agency with a lot of different programs, and I'm not even going to start to get into all the details. But some of the things that are already in place are services to assist farmers in establishing pollinator habitat. They will help you to restore land that's been degraded or eroded. There are programs that will reward you after you've already taken the steps to get pollinator habitat going, and they'll give you further incentives to keep you going. So, I mean, there are some good things out there, and we definitely want to make sure that those stay in the next Farm Bill. Other things out there are long-term easements that the government will pay 90 to 100% if land can be tied up for 30 years or maybe even for a lifetime. And in that regard, what we want to get into the program is to be sure that a finite percentage of the funds to that kind of an easement system are dedicated to pollinator plants, pollinator habitat. Maybe the very best thing that's already there, even though it's much reduced right now, is the Conservation Reserve Program. This is one where the farmers are paid directly to take marginal farmland out of production, and then they'll establish a mix of grasses and flowering plants. We, of course, always are trying to encourage them to make sure that that seed mix has got a lot in there that will benefit bees, native and managed. The trouble is, if some of you are probably aware, but I'll give you a quick history. A few years ago, the price of commodities like corn, soybeans really shot through the roof, giving a huge incentive for farmers to take land out of that Conservation Reserve Program and put it into crop production. 9 million acres or so came out, and for those of us like me in the upper Midwest, it was just a disaster in terms of available forage for bees. Because those prices have now plummeted back down, there's quite a few farmers that are kind of interested, since they're not even breaking even, for example, on corn often, they're ready now to maybe start putting some of that land back in. And we want to definitely, hopefully, encourage the legislative process to get as much of that acreage back in there as we possibly can. That would really be a good thing. The thing about it is that we are, of course, even though we're in a good position and everybody tends nowadays to look pretty favorably on bees and pollinators, we're a tiny, tiny group. And so we're going to have to get anything done, we're going to have to partner with other interests that are going to be down looking for the piece of the pie in Washington. That'll be obviously conservation groups, but also even maybe working with the corn lobby, the soybean lobby, because these guys, like I say, they're now a little bit more interesting now. The idea of them getting direct subsidies seems no longer to be much of an option. So if their crop isn't giving them the money, they're far more interested than they used to be in accepting some conservation money. If we were to possibly get someone in the House of Representatives to begin to write a bill before this thing gets too far along so that there's something to put in the hands of Congress, that would help. The problem is, and by the way, if anybody could find my picture. If you can't, don't worry about it. But this is, in the best of times, in the best of times, this is really tough. It's an unsavory, boring, demanding job to be down in Washington. Nobody really, those in the beekeeping community, by and large, eschew this sort of thing. But you have to pay amazing attention to detail. And the way you write these things, a word here or a comma there can all of a sudden lose you the support of some farm group or conservation group that you really desperately need. Anybody got a Pride Alliance here anywhere? There! This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a lot of money down there in Washington, and you got a lot of people going, and that's who's going for it. So you remember, this is really hard ball. It really is. And you want to remember that the other competitors that are going for that beast there are very well equipped to do what they want to do, and for the most part, they're way better funded than we are, and they are ready. They've got their lobbyists and their attorneys, and they've got their ducks in a row. So if we're not really careful how we approach this thing, for example, if we need to leave a lot of our baggage behind. If you want to try to get habitat, then go for habitat. You may want to go for something about climate change or reducing genetically modified organisms, such a thing. But I think if you want habitat, you better just go for habitat and keep your wording broad and simple and clear, and maybe we'll have a chance to get something done. It's a very difficult thing. So the competitors are not only capable, but they're also capable of taking us out. I mean, they're formidable. This is not easy stuff. And we as beekeepers, I don't think, are really always the ones to do it. We may need to testify, but we're going to need professional lobbyists, as dirty a word as that may sound like. We need people that are paying attention to this thing all the time and really working it. However, the Texas Rangers used to always say, there's no outlaw anywhere over time who can truly resist good and determined people who just keep on coming. So let's keep on coming. Yeah.
What would the benefit of putting glyphosated neonicotinoid tainted soil into pollinator corridors do anybody?
What's the benefit of doing
do any
that?
bee? Yeah, wouldn't want that land to be used for bees if there's systemics in them.
Well, you got to remember that, yeah, like Chaz was saying, some of these things are residual forever and ever and ever, but you're going to have to start sometime. And that's one thing I left out, by the way, too. Let me get a quick sip. Getting cotton mouth here. One of the other avenues we need to pursue is starting to get some kind of funding dedicated to the transition of conventional farming into organic and sustainable agriculture. There's no excuse for not to do that. But if we're going to do that, what is it, 3 years, they say, to start the transition before you can declare a piece of ground organic? Maybe that's not long enough. But I think, yeah, even though that stuff might be contaminated and initially pretty toxic, what else can we do? We need to start turning the table back the other way if we possibly can.
Yes. Is there any money in the pipeline, in the research pipeline, for improved pollinator habitat? Or are we using the same old? Is there any botanical research coming to improve pollinator habitat?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask about that. I would hope there's money like that in the pipeline. Any of you researchers that are, you would maybe know. or Marla down there maybe would.
So these programs, they have different options for how you will use land, and some of them definitely can involve habitat improvement as well. Yeah.
I just remembered somebody asked about, could we possibly do something about the ethanol mandate? Okay. You know, it's my guess with the attitude of people that are going to take power in Washington, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of that right now, and that corn lobby is going to be really tough. But we can all vote. When you get out of your gas pump, if it says there's ethanol in there, and another one says there isn't any in there, you can sure vote that way. And you know, and yep.
Just the last question I might have real quickly. We've got just a short answer, Bill, if you know this. I'm curious, do you have any advocates in Congress that you know of? I mean, who really are stepping up to the plate or who might step up to the plate, you know, to be an advocate in the halls of Congress?
I can't give you their names, but colleagues of mine in the industry that pay more attention to this than I do, yeah, there are starting points. Yep, there are. And that's the other thing we all need to do, and be merciless about it. Just keep sending letters, you know, just hammer, hammer, hammer. You know, we're tired of being poisoned. We're tired of putting all this money into destroying the land for this big mega corn crop, and the poor guys aren't making any money doing it anyway, right? So, yep. Am I done? All right.
So our next thought leader, I'm sure, is standing by somewhere nearby, coming up on the stage. Jim Frazier is Professor Emeritus of Entomology from Penn State University. He's conducted research on sublethal impacts of pesticides on bees for the last 8 years, and interestingly enough, Jim is going to be talking about pesticides.
Good evening. I'd like to talk about one of the cross-cutting issues that fell out of our discussion, building alliances, and in this case, for developing a unified voice to reduce pesticide impacts in our food system. What's our current situation? Well, developing new pesticides has become increasingly more difficult through the emphasis on developing greater human safety and environmental safety. One of the first success stories after the pass of the Food Quality Protection Act was a new class of pesticides called neonicotinoids. They're called this because their molecular structure mimics nicotine that impacts a particular site within the nervous system of almost all animals. It has become the dominant pesticide in the world today due to their very low human toxicity and their systemic action within plants that allows them to protect the plant from pest damage throughout the entire growing season. By combining neonicotinoid pesticides with genetically modified plants that had a new insect gene in it for resistance, and coupling this with herbicides, this pest control package has become the standard in over 150 million acres of soybeans, corn, and canola throughout the United States. Unfortunately, the neonicotinoids are uniquely toxic for honeybees, and perhaps for other native pollinators as well. At this point, we simply don't know. But their systemic action, their long-lasting residual in the soil, their water solubility, have combined to produce multiple impacts on pollinators that were not fully measured or anticipated when these products were registered. The extent of this damage has been borne by the beekeepers. Over the last 10 years in using these materials, it's now an appropriate time to look back and say, what have we gained and what have we lost? It's the beekeepers who really have been hurt the most. Over the last 6 years, beekeepers have lost an average of $300 million per year in lost colonies and production. And estimates of the impact on the environment and food system exceed more than $126 million a year. Up here on the screen are 3 recent studies that will give you all the details you need to know about the current status of scientific literature, the impacts of the neonicotinoids, the cost of doing this, the cost of this on our environment, and some suggestions for changes to be made. What are the potential solutions? Well, beekeepers are a fringe group. They're such a small number of people that they have no political voice. And yet, honeybees are the third most important animal in our food system because the value of pollination is somewhere between $20 and $30 billion a year. The only way that beekeepers are going to have a meaningful voice in Washington in terms of changing policy and impacting what happens there is by forming coalitions with other groups who have similar values about a clean environment, sustainable food production system, and conservation of wild places. So our first bold idea from our group is that we really need to expand beekeeper alliances. Bill gave us a great example of how the Farm Bill can be impacted and urged us to write letters. We need to impact Washington on a daily basis. So developing a much larger alliance through organizing another conference like this one seems high on our agenda, to bring in all these other groups and verify our common values and goals with the goal of producing a unified voice to speak in Washington. This new alliance is something you'll hear about shortly. Many of these other groups are well established in Washington, have been trying to impact policy for many years, and can be great allies for us in this fight. Okay, can we, all right, our second idea here. Our second idea is that the negative impacts of pesticides deserve some immediate changes in our current production system and a reevaluation of the true costs and benefits that have come to light over the last 10 years. The neonicotinoid treated seeds in our commodity production system seems to be an ideal place to begin. We've learned that the initial risks to bees and the environment were not fully measured, and that the promised economic returns have not been realized. We now have 16 major weed species completely resistant to Roundup herbicide because of its prophylactic use. We're calling for a temporary moratorium on the use of seed treatments to be implemented immediately until a thorough cost-benefit analysis can be completed. And based on the experience in the European Union, where trial reductions have been done, no loss in yield was found. Our third idea is to urge beekeepers who come to California each year for the largest pollination event in the world, that of almonds, and bringing more than half of all the bee colonies in the United States here, to negotiate a one-time surcharge of $3 per hive from the almond growers and offer $1 per hive from their own profits. This would develop a $4 million fund that could be used to develop this common agenda organization with a common goal of addressing contentious issues and impact public policy each day of the year. Thank you for your attention, and welcome questions.
Yes, I presume we have a lot of members of the Marin Beekeepers Club in this room. And our local congressman, Jared Huffman, is having a session with the community. I don't know, was it 17th or 19th? Something like that. 19th, there you go.
19th of December.
Yes. Might be a good project for the club to get a voice or multiple voices at that meeting to get us started.
I'm also a member of the Bee Club, and I got basically a real simple question. Let's say I go to Home Depot, I buy a honey plant or a mellifluous plant that has been treated with this poison. Would that be dangerous to the bees and native pollinators?
Yes, it would, and in fact, there's been a recognition of that problem by Home Depot and some of the other large producers of ornamental plants, and a pledge to stop accepting plants that have been raised under those pesticide regimes.
There we go.
The EU banned
the neonics in 2012, is that correct, I think? So my question is, what is it about the United States? Obviously, I guess it's the power of pesticide companies, but how could the EU come together and do that, and we haven't done it yet? When this problem goes back how many years now already? We know that the neonicotinoids are, damaging the bees.
Yeah, there's a very practical answer to that question, and that is, by law, the EPA is prohibited from operating under the precautionary principle, which Europe and many other countries in the world do operate under. So the precautionary principle says if we do not understand the full impacts of something, we're going to err on the conservative side and not use it until we know better. In the United States, we use it, and if we make mistakes, then feedback will tell us to make changes and we'll readjust. But we are not allowed to operate under the precautionary principle. Once again, it's not chiseled in stone. It could be changed with a loud enough voice that could become a real issue.
Jim, thank you very, very much. Our penultimate thought leader, second to the last but not by any way least, is Stephen Martin. He's a professor of social entomology from the University of Salford in Manchester in the United Kingdom. He studies the reasons why honeybees are dying with a particular focus on the varroa mite and the viruses it transmits. And I think, Stephen, you're going to come up and talk about pollinator alliances.
Okay, for 20 years I've studied why bees die, the viruses and their interaction with varroa. So I am now going so far out of my comfort zone. For the first time ever, I'm going to talk about something I know absolutely nothing about. So all information that I'm going to now give you was given to me by the people in the meeting that we've had. And I think this is an audacious thing. So let's see where it goes. Okay, so the audacious idea that I saw emerge from the meeting was a new way to get your voice heard at the highest level. Currently, many beekeeping organizations exist, from local to national, but they're often not very well linked up. And sometimes they focus on a narrow subject, something maybe like the honey board. However, many people, groups, organizations, large and small, are affected or concerned about the pollinator losses. And this is why we're all here. So, what came out of the meeting was the idea of a brand new alliance that will bring together urban and commercial beekeepers, organic farmers and master gardeners, honey consumers, there's a lot of them, and honey users, the cosmetics industry, for example. But to be truly audacious, these alliances must also include novel alliances, like the fishing and hunting community, Ducks Unlimited, so we get all our ducks lined in a row. Pheasants Forever, Centre for Biodiversity, and the National Fish and Wildlife Services. And these are just a small flavor. I mean, there's huge numbers of other ones. But even the Department of Defense, and the reason for that, they own huge amounts of land. They have conservationists, and I've worked with a conservationist in the Department of Defense, saving a solitary bee, native solitary bee in Hawaii. So we're all these groups, doesn't matter how disparate they all have this common aim and concern. So This new audacious alliance would give a common voice to a vast number of people that will be heard loud and clear even at the highest levels. So I give to you the audacious idea of the North American Pollination Alliance. Thank you very much.
Working for the Park Service, I'm also adjunct faculty working here with Dr. Cunningham and others. We've been doing inventories on bees here. In Marin County, we have 500 species of native bees. So we're very happy to work with all of you and cooperate in further research and endeavors.
Excellent, thank you.
This question is really for all of you. Were the national and state beekeepers organizations invited to this, and where did they come into play with all these alliances?
One of you like to, Mark, you want to?
The meeting was very, very diverse. There were representatives there who were members of those organizations. There were hobby beekeepers, who were members of commercial organizations. But we deliberately didn't invite people as representatives of organizations, but we invited them for their backgrounds. What was the second part of your question?
I wondered how they might fit into
How they might fit in?
How do they might fit into these alliances?
Yeah, they would most certainly want to be components. We'd want the Eastern Apicultural Society, the American Beekeeping Federation, the American Honey Producers, many of the local groups. There's a lot of urban groups. We'd like the Marin County Beekeepers Association to be part, and then of course extend into all the groups that Stephen was talking about that are not so directly involved with bees. Big tent, big tent.
Ducks Unlimited and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service have a tremendous amount of land, as we all know. But locally, Sonoma Land Trust, that you know about very well, and Malt, these are some of the largest landowners in the same mindset that we have here and probably across America. It seems to me a logical part of this umbrella as part one. And part two is when you get into Cornell Lab of Ornithology and you get into Bird Studies Canada, and I don't know about where Audubon is today, but these are giant organizations, very connected, you know, John Muir, tug on anything to find it connected to everything else.
That's a great point, and I would just add to that, you know, we have more protected land here in the Bay Area than any urban region on Earth. 3 million acres currently, and growing, and they're restoring wetlands and doing all kinds of things. So we have these incredible agencies and organizations and nonprofits. I mean, it really is a terrifically complicated, in a wonderful way, community, and all kinds of partners out there.
Is anyone stepping in to be accountable for this alliance yet?
Oh, well,
right, I can join the not knowing what I'm talking about group.
Yeah, well volunteered.
So not yet. Nobody stepped up yet.
I mean, it's an idea, but take it forward.
Got it. Audacious idea.
So other than being an individual and wanting to get involved, how might you go about connecting with these organizations, especially if you're trying to make a bigger impact by doing some sort of project, but you may not either have nonprofit status to apply for grants or through a research university? Is there any way that an individual might be able to initiate some sort of project that you know of?
The outcome of this conference at this moment was many, many, many audacious ideas. And as you read the report, you'll get particular ideas. But I got to tell you, there is only one way to make this change. Every one of you needs to find the one thing that you can do. It's going to be different for each of you. And if you have thousands of people across the country that find that one thing they can do and all start doing it, it will build. That's how movements happen. And we're very optimistic that coming off of this conference and many other things, that there is a rising interest. Tom just mentioned to me this thought that I think is quite true, that bees are a tool to use for much larger issues around conservation. They are a way into this issue. And we, as people involved with bees, can provide a great service to the rest of the community by using bees for in that way.
Well, by far not least but last is our ninth thought leader presentation. You may have seen her spectacular TED Talk. Her name is Marla Spivak. Yes. Rounds of applause. Here she comes. She's on her way. She is a MacArthur Fellow, my gosh, a Genius Grant, a distinguished McKnight Professor of Entomology at the University of Minnesota, the Golden Gophers or something like that, right? Yes, you are. Where she studies, among all things, bee health, and she is now going to bring this all together.
So when I was asked to write put out an audacious idea, I can't even say the word after all this, I really struggled with that. I struggled a long time with that. And finally I lobbed something out there, and it went, I'm going to do it very briefly. My first idea was that with time, there could be separation of bee stocks and management practices between large-scale migratory beekeepers and small-scale, more natural beekeepers. And I was thinking about best management practices for each along 2 tracks with no room in between. And then I got here, and the first day, within the first hour, when we were talking amongst ourselves, and I wish Heather was here too, and when we were talking amongst ourselves, somebody started talking about how diversity is healthy. Biodiversity, genetic diversity, diversity of kinds of bees, diversity in kinds of beekeeping styles. And I started thinking that diversity and experimentation is really the stuff of evolution and change. It's the essence of evolutionary, ecological, and economic resilience. So I chucked my idea completely. And for the first 2 days of the conference, I didn't know I didn't have any audacious anything. And then one of the breakout sessions occurred, and my room filled with too many people and with very diverse opinions. And we were in a section on diseases, mites, and bee health, which is a serious problem that warrants a serious solution. Some in the group wanted to know how to use their bees' own wisdom to heal themselves, how to listen to the bees and use their self-healing system. Others that depend on bees for a living wanted to know about the next-gen treatment for bees, genetic, RNAi, what's new, what else can we do to keep our bees alive? And while I was listening, I started thinking about our current tech transfer team program. This is a national program where professional beekeepers go out and help monitor the health of commercial migratory beekeepers. And I thought, with a little more funding and more people power, that program could do so much more. And then rather than ramp up treatments for beekeepers, for the commercial beekeepers, they could be moving toward more what was advocated here, is to reduce reliance on synthetic treatments for mites and help bees through bee breeding. And I thought also that with more funding and people power, new teams could be developed to provide support to more local Darwinian beekeeping using management practices that we heard this evening. And I also wondered how we could encourage more support for our wild bees in our landscapes. And then somebody in my group pitched this idea called the Bee Corps. And like the Peace Corps, that works with beekeepers where they're at, in their region, in their local ecosystem, in their stage of knowledge and capacity, in their cultural context, and to their scale. So an essential mission of the Bee Corps, this is the audacious idea now that, hallelujah, I finally got one back. Okay, the essential mission of the Bee Corps would be to promote respect for the diversity of all bees, beekeeping styles, and respect for neighboring beekeepers. So for example, in remote areas where there's low density of bee colonies, many beekeepers can be treatment-free. Darwinian beekeepers, go for it, please do it. And in big cities like where I live, lots of backyard beekeepers, that requires a more community health approach to bee health, it really does. And in rural areas, what we need to do, as we've heard, is provide a lot more forage. So our commercial beekeepers, those guys that are moving their bees around, and women, that are moving their bees around for pollination services of our food crops, we need good nutrition for their bees. They need good, clean food so we can have good, clean food. So instead of imposing these 1 or 2 sets of best management practices on beekeepers, we would develop and support diverse and context-dependent sets of best management practices. Okay, and here's the best part. Our new, oh, he took it down, new National Pollinator Alliance, as they lobby for increased forage for bees, as we all lobby for increased forage for bees, for farming with wild bees, and for addressing pesticide issues, we would lobby for the Bee Corps to be federally funded under our new Farm Bill. And because all of our bees and our diverse beekeepers are vital to food security and ecosystem health. And so I want to end with some words from Andy Vig. He's a member of the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community, and he and his father, Chairman Vig, came out to our grand opening we had of our new bee research facility in the University of Minnesota. And from here on, it's a quote from him. As Dakota people, we believe that we are all related here on Earth. We have a certain type of interconnectedness, not just with human beings, but an understanding of oneness and harmony with all forms of life. We recognize different animal and plant species by their own individual nations. For example, we have the buffalo nation, the elk nation, the deer nation, and we have different plant and tree nations, and even the bee nation. Tuhmaga Oyate. He ended by saying, we thank the Tuhmaga Oyate, the bee nation, for helping Mother Earth grow and keep us alive. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Minnesota, Marla, and I moved to California a year ago and have checked out the local bee clubs, and I nominate the Sonoma County Bee Group as a model for your bee nation. They have partnering, they have sections of the county that each get little in-services each year with the latest possibilities for improving their beekeeping. They go to schools, they reach out to the public. So education and sharing, when they get swarms, they share their swarms. What they do was amazing to me. After being in Minnesota, where the amount of honey seemed to be the main topic of the bee club.
I'm glad that wasn't a question. I don't want to answer.
That's all right. It's a great statement.
That's really wonderful. I'm glad.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to her question. I just made an incredible partnership with a group of parents that are concerned about safe environments, and they are encouraging civic administrations and schools to stop defoliating playgrounds and parks with glyphosates and neonicotinoids. And joining them as a beekeeper, I've just given them a whole volume more of argument. And it's a happy alliance so far.
So it's wonderful. There's so many things that are going on already that when we start folding this into a big pollinator alliance, it's imagine the power.
Kind of a question. I love your idea about the Bee Corps. I was in the Peace Corps as a beekeeper. So, but
where,
yeah,
where,
so count
where
me
were
in.
you?
Honduras.
Okay.
In the 80s, but yeah, count me in on your Bee Corps. And I guess with your idea about the Bee Corps or the Bee Nation, it wouldn't just be Apis mellifera, it would be all bees,
Yes,
also our solitary
absolutely.
bees, and the gentleman from the National Park Service who talked about the 500 native pollinators.
Yes, absolutely. That's part of it.
Hi. After listening to all the speakers, I realized that we need to move the debate from the bees to saving the earth. Because really the bees is telling us what we're doing to the earth. We're poisoning the soil. We're, getting poisoned plants out there for gardeners to put out thinking they're helping the bees and the environment when they're doing the opposite way. And I just really feel that there is a real need for a concerted national organization or alliance that goes out there and galvanizes the public and the other vested interests, like where is Sierra Club in this thing? Where's the organizations that worry about water? Because it's water soluble, it's going in our water. So every person should be concerned about what's happening, not just the beekeepers, the pollinators, or the farmers. And I think we need somebody to spearhead the effort on a national scale to educate the public through different alliances on the state level or regional level to get the word out.
We do too.
I think you've got a following here. Thank you very much. Now what we'd like to do for that statement, because that actually segues pretty nicely, I think, Mark, into what you want to do here. Mark's going to come back and say some words and ask all of us to take some action, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some more comments, questions before we close.
Okay, we'd like you all to participate and be audacious, and wonderful to hear these last groups of comments about what can you do. You've all got index cards. This is what we did at the conference, and now you get a chance to do it. I'd like you to fill out the index cards with two things. Just a phrase that indicates your most bold, audacious idea for what we can do to help the bees. And the second thing is I'd like you to write one thing that you will commit to help save the bees, what you think you can do. So two things, phrase about what you can do that's bold and audacious, what you think we should do that's bold and audacious. And the second thing, what you will commit to. Don't put your names on them, Chatham House rule. As soon as you're done, pass them over to the aisles. The volunteers will collect them. They'll become part of our report. And do it quick, because we want to have a little more time that Doug can lead us in a bit more discussion.
So let's see, we have a hand right here in the third row. Right there we go. Raise your hands high when you are ready to do it. Great, and sir, go ahead.
So 50 years ago, the environmental movement sort of entered a new era where you saw a whole host of new organizations emerge. And the theme among those was it was bringing sort of four threads together, which was the political activism that you talked about, but it was also bringing the science you talked about. What you didn't talk about was the legal aspect and the economics were sort of hinted at. What I didn't hear was how you bring them all together. You had sort of elements of it, but you didn't really talk about it because movements in the United States, whatever it may be, whether it's social movements in gay rights or whatever, really require the bringing together of those multiple themes so you can be effective across the spectrum of the modes of action. How do you envision actually implementing that? Because that is the history of environmental change over the last half century.
Well, we envision that you putting your chair right here and sitting with us and helping us out. We just did this today, right? So this is early. We need your help.
So being in Marin, we have 4 things going on at one time. We've got banned glyphosate, and that's in Marin, and we get from them some information. Will there ever be like a website where we can look at, let's see, a nursery that puts poison on plants? The only way I found out that it kills certain plants are killing my monarch butterfly habitat, because that's another alliance, was that I saw this from this banned glyphosate. Will there ever be a big website everybody could go to and say, oh, this, can I say, okay, Lowe's puts poison on their plants, which kills the caterpillars.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and it's something that could certainly come out of this coalition discussion that we're hoping to begin here. Absolutely.
It's not exactly a question, but it's a comment, follow up on this idea of how do we get an alliance going. You know, a lot of environmental organizations and so forth and movements, movements for a cause that got started didn't have what we have. We have thousands of small beekeeping organizations across this country that are ready and willing to be motivated to work on these kinds of issues. So it's sort of to use the honeybee as a vehicle to help us in an effort to, plant more habitat, to protect the environment, to try to work on these issues around pesticides. So I think what it might be is a way, trying to find a way to help consolidate and motivate these small organizations to reach out to other organizations within their states or their communities, and so bringing these things together. It's nice because we have a foundation. We already have a foundation. We already have a potential network to work from in all of these small, local, state, and even our national beekeeping organizations.
So I liked very much a couple earlier comments. One about doing context-dependent best practices, and the other one about picking one thing. And I think that is the heart of it, because we all know that you have two beekeepers, you have three opinions. We're speaking now as though there is one clear agenda that our alliance is going to go forth with. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think there's any facts. Well, I'm going to put it in the form of a question. What will it take for us to agree on one or two facts that we can then go advocate on, so that we can all go to our congresspeople, whoever, and make one cogent argument for one thing we agree is the right thing?
Okay, Chaz.
What we really lack that others have is a lobby. We need to create a lobby that will advocate for habitat and to stop the misuse and abuse of pesticides. So whether people agree on no three beekeepers will agree on the same issue. I understand that, and that's true. But whether they agree or not on that, we still agree on these general issues, and we need to create a lobby to address those issues. Does that answer the question?
So maybe a mechanism might be this format, which really inspired us all, could be replicated elsewhere, and maybe it's time, to get a few more stakeholders that we think are potential allies together, and then you say, what would be the one or the two or the three things that we can agree on? That's how we will find out. Yeah, that's right. If you get an alliance like this, you aren't going to be able to say we're going to take on 15 maybe big issues, because maybe you aren't going to get everybody on board for 15, but by God, there's probably two or three, and I think habitat, amen, you're going to get very few dissenters on that. Some sane treatment of the pesticide issue, that's going to be another one. I don't know what else, but I think maybe that's the mechanism to ferret that out, get going.
I'd like to say that being bold and audacious is the outcome of this conference. It's going to be the outcome of another conference we have on a grander scale. And through that broad coalition, we can hire a lobbyist, or we can lobby each of us every day. And I think with proper enthusiasm, open communication, and commitment to how many ever important issues are out there, we can make a multi-pronged approach that will never stop. The greatest voice in America is that of we the people. It's time that we roar.
More of a comment than a question.
Sure.
And that is, in terms of facts, I mean, we live in a world where facts are contestable and information is paramount. There's facts going both ways. I'd suggest that a fact that many of us with any feeling would consider a fact that basically the commons of nature that support life as we know it, including our own, are in trouble, and that we need to make some changes. And people can contest that fact or what you want to do about it. And I'd suggest that we choose with every waking dollar that we spend. Everything that we buy and throw away comes from living environments. And I mean, I suggest all the time in terms of Christmas presents, perhaps the best Christmas presents that we can give are living environments and clean air, fresh water, and healthy soil rather than a bunch of byproducts. And I also suggest if we want to change our lives, change our world, cancel our garbage service. Live with our backsides in our living room for a week or a month, literally, and we will change our lives incredibly. It's like it's not gooey garbage to wrap up 10 layers of plastic. I mean, ultimately, it's all compost. And we choose with everything we buy and throw away. And what are we choosing? Basically, what are we leaving behind? Are we leaving sticky goo, or are we leaving compost that's basically building soil? And we choose with every dollar we spend.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm here with the Sierra Club, and we are interested and I would say anxious to do more nationally and locally. One issue that we have is, because there are so many stakeholders, how to coordinate, and especially who to reach out to, who best represents beekeepers, who has that voice amongst all these organizations that are out there.
I think I'll give you the really short answer, is how do you find that information? How can you connect to the individuals who can really make things happen? And I would put you in touch. Bonnie Morse, she knows everyone, she knows who to talk to, and she can connect you with people all over the country, and you can certainly talk to some of us who can suggest names to you as well. There's probably dozens of people we can suggest that would really love to make an alliance with the Sierra Club.
Very nice. Well, thank you guys. You have been wonderful. You guys have been just all terrific. Conference participants, thank you so much for making this possible. Bonnie, Gary, just what a great achievement. And all of you for all that you're doing, and then walking out of here with audacious inspiration, which will be a great way to start the new year. And we're going to need all the inspiration we can get in 2017. So I just will wrap it up by saying again, beaudacious.org anytime. But for the video coming up in a few days, that'll be terrific. Mark is going to have your conclusion part in March available, the synopsis of all of this, and Mark in March. So stand by for that. And now what we're going to do is we have, I think, Mark and Tom and Marla all have some books that they can sign up here on the stage. And we have, I think there's a few others, right? 7 others who have books out here that are appropriate. And so let's just give us a second for everybody else to leave. A round of applause for our thought leaders.